Hey there, dear tech fam. Many companies come up with great ideas, and a lot of founders assume because the idea is great, the product will sell itself. But that's not how things work. Without the right strategy, positioning, and message, even the best ideas fall flat. This episode is all about how to avoid that. We dig into why so many startups skip strategy and jump straight into tactics, what branding actually means, and how to align marketing and sales into a real revenue engine. If you're thinking about hiring a marketing leader or becoming one yourself, this episode has a ton of practical insights. My guest is Angelo Ponzi, a seasoned brand specialist and a fractional CMO who has helped companies reposition, grow, and prepare for acquisition. He brings decades of experience in both the agency and corporate worlds, and he knows exactly how to help companies clarify their message and align their teams around it. You can find out more about Angelo on LinkedIn. His LinkedIn is linkedin.com/in/Angelo Ponzi. But for now, let's jump into it. So I guess the best place to start, there's a few different places we can go and have a bunch of questions for you already, but let's just jump into how you fell into marketing in general, and then what made you want to go the fractional route. So fractional's been around for a while, but I think it's like a hot topic now, and more people are understanding that they don't have to invest all their time into one company. So how did marketing start, and then how did you jump towards fractional?
So, so interestingly, I mean, I've been around long enough that I've done this before. We just called it part-time or outsourcing, right? Not fractional. But in this situation, we're about ready to turn 11 years old in about a week and a half. And so I have to give you a little bit of history, right? So started off, I've always been in marketing. I've always been the strategy guy. I have a research background, and it's always been the thing that I've done. And so I've been client side, I've been agency side, I've had my own agency, I've been a consultant. And then as we kind of moved along, and making the long story short, I was corporate side once again. And about 2.5 years, it was about a $30 million company. I was told, hey, there's going to be opportunities for equity and all that kind of stuff. And then they sell the company. And we had a commercial division, which I was leading, and we had a government side. And so the people that bought us wanted our government stuff because they were in the building satellites and all this kind of stuff. And our methodology and the things that we did would help them. They had no clue about what we did. As a matter of fact, they asked me one day, so why did it take you 10 months to land a project for 50 grand with Disney? I go, well, it's Disney. You just can't walk in and. And they didn't understand it. So new CEO comes in, gives a presentation to the company. And at the end of the presentation, I raised my hand and said, I didn't see my division up there. And I watched him panic and freak out, and I came home that night and I went, I'm done. I'm going to go back and start working for myself again. So this would probably been like the fourth or fifth time in my career that I did this. So I was never afraid to do it. A lot of people, when they leave the corporate world and now they're going to go out and kind of, hunt for themselves, get to eat what they kill. I've already done it, so there was no fear. Maybe that was a detriment because I have no fear. But when I started this, it was a little more research based. And what I found over my career, whenever I start with research, it would morph into, well, now that you know all this information, can you help me with strategy? And then now that you've done the strategies, can you help me with the execution? So I started to see it morph pretty quick. And so I made the conscious decision not to be the tactical side, the transactional side, but stick with strategy. So the word fractional, really when I started this 11 years ago, it was like, I don't understand what fractional is, right? And so it kind of was there when this started to evolve. And now I think it's everywhere. I can't throw a stone without hitting a fractional person. I can't throw a pebble without hitting 10 people that are not really fractional people. So that's kind of, the market's getting a little confusing now because you can literally just, hang a shingle out there and call yourself a CMO, and, and your background isn't wouldn't really justify it. So I think there's a lot of confusion in the market. There's a confusion in the market about, and stop me if I'm off topic, but about marketing. So like the CMO, as soon as they hear the chief marketing officer, they go, oh, well, you can do my website and my social media campaigns. I go, well, yeah, I can, but that's not what I want to do, right? And so personally, I've been morphing a little bit more in the chief strategy officer side of it because it really more aligns with what I do, and I've held that role before. So fractional then becomes, I think, a little confusing. We have to still explain the difference between interim, fractional, consulting, right, or advisory versus full time, right? So I'm not going to just tell you what to do. We're going to do a lot of it as well. So I find that, this role, people say to me, well, man, this is great. You work for yourself. You work for a bunch of different companies. I go, yeah, there's a good and there's bad, right? Because I do all that. I also work, 12 hours a day and sometimes on the weekends. But, we did that when we worked for companies too. So I think it's, to your point, everybody, fractional CFOs, CMOs, COOs, CEOs, general counsels. I mean, I go to a meeting, I network a lot, and, in the meeting, there's at least somebody with a fractional title.
Yeah. It's it's picked up a lot more so. And I think in the past, people were like, oh, I'll just consult, as opposed to calling themselves fractional. Now that's well, it's very different, but now it's getting mixed up, and so that makes sense. But with that being said, with your journey and your thought process, now when you look at a prospective client, let's start with who hires a fractional CMO. Well, why not just hire a CMO, or why not just hire a firm or a consultant? So like, who hires a fractional CMO?
Sure. So for me, I kind of say my sweet spot's kind of on the low end, 5 million, and then upwards to whoever. Because typically, I'll say is the revenue increases, they're more likely to have a me, and so that me is not going to hire me, right? Letting the fox in the hen house. But I would say that, and I have a B2B and B2C background, a little more on the B2B side right now, that I am brought in by the CEO, president, because and maybe in a combination with the CFO. So that's usually what's happening. Sometimes it's about revenue. In those, they want to go right to sales, but help them understand that marketing and sales is a revenue engine. And you notice I said marketing and sales, not sales and marketing, because in hindsight, that's really the way it works, right? We're building that awareness, we're doing the positioning and the messaging, we're driving that interest, creating those opportunities, and then it goes to sales, and sales takes it from there. So it really is a synergistic relationship. I know there's always the stories of sales and marketing fighting, and they do, but when you can find that harmony, it's incredible, and I have had those opportunities with a couple partners. But typically, it has something to do with revenue, has something to do with messaging and positioning and competition. Are usually triggers, but ultimately it's somewhere around revenue. I had a conversation with a company this morning. The trigger was their revenues have been going down for the last 2 years. But in doing my due diligence, I could see right off the bat that, maybe and I didn't know them yet, so maybe they had a sales problem. They certainly had a messaging and positioning problem. And so, I was able to talk about that, and then we morphed into what's going on the sales side and operational. So I'm a holistic marketer. So it isn't about marketing. It's not about sales. It's about everything. I want to know about process. I want to know about operations. I want to know about product, profitability. I want to get into your finances, because ultimately all those pieces make up the company, and they all work together. And so making sure that the numbers are right. I've worked with a company a couple of years ago. They have this tremendous hockey stick growth plan, But at the end of the day, nobody's paying attention to existing clients, and the revenues were going down because they were so focused on new business. Their customer service was actually helping them lose clients. And so, again, trying to discover all that and trying to figure all that out. So, long-winded answer, it's usually somebody from the C-suite that brings me in.
Well, and then so with what you just mentioned, so as a fractional CMO, how do you address the issues that you just mentioned that company had, being that it's a little bit out of your wheelhouse, you might be stepping on some toes. So how do you go about bringing that light without being, I don't know, without stepping on toes, or maybe it's okay to step on toes, but how do you go about doing that?
Sure. Well, I try to explain right off when we start talking that who I am, and if they're bringing me in to go, I'm being facetious, execute their social media plan, or I just tell them right off the bat, I'm not that guy. I need to have a seat at the table. I need to be able to, have honest conversations, and you need to be honest with me, and we need to help identify the problems. And those problems don't always result in, messaging or positioning. The answer could be you're doing great there, but your execution is poor, or you've got process issues. The company I worked with, their pipeline, the youngest prospect in the pipeline was 150 days. The oldest was well over a year. And so the question was, why? I don't understand. There was like 15 or 20 of them in there, and they're all been around for a long time. And long story short, after I've been there for a little while, I started to understand that they were doing all the work that they needed to do, and then they get to the end and they hand it to the lawyers. And then the lawyers would take another 3 or 4 or 5 months. And so I just said simply, is the document, the contract that you send to the lawyers, is it customized or is it, standard? And they went, well, about 85% of it's just standard. I go, well, why don't we give it to them in the beginning, let them start noodling on that stuff, and then we can fill in the blanks. And it was like, that's interesting. But they've been doing it the same way for, 30 years. Yeah. And so by looking at that, I'm looking at the hockey stick growth, trying to understand what are the issues. One of the assignments was, how big is our market? Well, looking at all the things they were trying to do, and then it was like, I need to see, what revenues have looked like for the last 5 years. I want to see what trends are going on. I want to understand the vertical markets that you're getting your sales from. And because ultimately, in doing that kind of due diligence, you're spending money chasing the vertical market, and either you don't have any business or it's your number one, and, you're not spending proportionately to continue to grow. And so by digging into all of that, that really helps create, that content or context for strategy. A client that I worked with a few years ago, I still sit on their board, 5 vertical markets, and they've been around for 25 years, and these are the markets they chase. But at the end of the day, only 3 of those were actually generating any kind of substantial revenue. 2 of them barely ever had sales in it, but they were spending equally across the board. And so just by looking at that and understanding, by digging into their data, knowing that they close 30% of every proposal. Well, now where do we spend our time chasing, $1,000 proposals? Or do we spend our time chasing, $100,000 proposals? And oh, by the way, your leading salesperson has 750 accounts. It is not manageable. So when I say holistically, it ultimately all that triggers, right? Because you do a great job in marketing, you generate the leads, and then it falls apart from something internally, or the process, or the bidding, or those kinds of things. Or we were sitting in a meeting one time, and the CEO says to the team, "What's your greatest wish today, head of sales?" And he goes, "I want $1 million order," and everybody's cheering, big rah-rah event. And I went, time out, inventory. We have the inventory for $100 million order? No, we do not. Can we supply chain? Can we get inventory? No, we can't. So that $1 million order just hurt the company, right? And so making sure everyone understands that it isn't siloed. We all interact with each other. It truly is it's the wheels inside the watch, or the whatever they call cogs. They're not cogs, but you know what I mean. Because it has to work in harmony. Order comes in, it has to be processed. All these people are part of the team. It's not like, hey, I got an order today and look at me, aren't I great? In the meantime, it falls down or it gets delayed or because there's no product or they can't build or they're overbooked. And now that sale hurt the company.
Well, some of that is culture based. Like, does your company know your company, right? And
Oh, absolutely.
many times, because when looking at for tech companies like sales engineering, or any kind of tech sales. Oh, do you want a computer that can read my mind? Oh, we have that. We'll make that for you, right? And then you send it over, and then your actual engineers are like, "What are you talking about? We can't. It's illegal," or whatever it is. So that's definitely culture based. But I do. So you said holistic, and when you said holistic thinking, I thought of maybe something a little bit different. And I want to address something you said earlier. There's no such thing as off topic. You can talk about anything you want. We will, because this is we're just understanding this.
Free flowing. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I'm doing the same thing, so I'm going in a little bit different direction. But this is definitely marketing. Could you tell me a little bit, because the word branding is such a quote unquote sexy word, right? Everyone talk. What's your personal brand? What's your company's brand? All these different things. If we're going down, dollars to donuts, branding for let's say any company, we can start at the beginning, start at like the startup phase, growing up, because when we think about it, thinking of just the Apple symbol, right? Initially that was just an apple, and then now it's their brand, right? But then the marketing part of it was actually, I want to save that for later because that's a question I want to ask you. And anyway, I'm not going to get there. But can you please dive into branding and what are the pitfalls of early companies trying to over brand or whatever that might be? But let's start, just simple, plain and simple branding, question mark.
Yeah, it is an interesting question because there's the definition of what is a brand, and really brand isn't, somebody will present their logo to me and say, here's my brand, and it's just a logo. That's your identity. It's not your brand. And so if you think about the pieces of branding and positioning and differentiation and all those different elements that make up the brand. Now, in a startup situation or a young company, I usually say that the brand is the owner, because the brand tends to take on the characteristics of that person, right? Because you're new, maybe you're by yourself, or you got one or two people, and you're influencing what's going on. But as you start to migrate and get sales and traction, then that has to start, the brand itself has to start taking on its own personality. And so I think of a brand as from a characteristic. What's your tone? Who are you? You're trustworthy, you're straightforward, those kinds of things. So those elements start to make up the brand of the company. And so it isn't just what you see, the Apple logo. The Apple logo now means so much to us, but there was a point in time it was just an apple with a bite out of it, right? Mm-hmm. And so you have to nurture and protect that essence of what you want. It's too easy to get off track. I have conversations with companies, and it's like, from a perception standpoint, let's talk about how you're perceived. How do you think you're perceived in the market? Then I'll go interview their customers and say, how do you perceive this company? More often than not, they're totally disconnected. And so while you think you're something, they think you're something different. And so therefore you get out of alignment. So, and why does that happen? Because you get people out telling different stories. If I ask 5 people, define your brand, give me your elevator pitch, I guarantee you all 5 will be different. All 11 will be different. It's because they don't protect it, right? They're not insistent. They're not putting guidelines or rules on it that this is how you speak about the company. And so brand now, kind of come current a little bit, I find has become a little loose. I don't want to call it the Kleenex or the Xerox of marketing, mm-hmm. But there's definitions, and so like we use brand, we talk about brand, we build brand strategies, but when I think about brand, it's about the company, it's about how they're positioned and the things the way I've been talking. But a lot of times when I say brand, people go right to creative, right? Mm-hmm. They think about that it's the imagery of it and not necessarily all the other things. And so when I use the word brand, it tends to be more related to the company. I find a lot of people I network with, when they say brand, they tend to think it's tactical stuff. And so there's this disconnect on how brand is being defined for me. And so by putting that, like even our URL is, marketing and branding. Uh, and so that confuses people, because I talk about I'm the strategy guy, and then they see the word branding, and then they go, well, I don't understand. I thought you were this, and now you're saying you're a brand guy. Because I just had a meeting with a guy the other day who says, I'm a brand guy. I define the brand, but his is more of a visual branding and not a strategic branding.
Well, I think the goal, for well, at least from the examples that we've seen over time, is for those two things to be one thing, right? Like when you think of Amazon, you think of, yes, getting stuff shipped to your house, but if you're in the tech space, you're thinking of the way they do strategy, you're thinking of the way that they do marketing, all these things. But not all companies get that big, so we have to pick one or the other to be, especially like if you're in a community-based company. The community knows what kind of company that is, even if the logo isn't global. Anyway, thank you. And so now, okay, so I've done research. I've gone through things that you've written, things on LinkedIn. So if I'm misquoting you, please let me know.
Okay.
But no, I just want to, because there's questions that come to me from what I read, right? So you've said sometimes companies focus too much on tactics, not enough on strategy. So I want to ask you, and because we just went through what we just went through, why do you think that is? Why do they miss? Because we in the age we live in, with all the books that come out on strategy and everything, when it comes to strategic marketing versus tactical execution, why do they miss it?
A great question, and it is. I did say that, and I say it all the time. I said it probably 35 minutes ago to a prospect. I actually have a book coming out in probably 6 weeks that focuses on strategy. I think it's the perception that, especially in the small, even to kind of the lower middle market, maybe even middle market, is the perception is the problem is always routed in their tactical execution. And to get them to understand that, yes, there's a problem there, but it may not be, an SEO problem. A lot of the stuff that you're doing is not relevant. You're talking about how great I use this all the time. I don't care that you've been in business for 75 years. It says you've done something right for the last 75 years. But what's going forward? And by the way, that just says, hey, we're here, we've done a good job. But there's no real value in that to me, other than hopefully you'll be around if I use you. And so by breaking all this stuff down to get to understanding what's relevant in the market, by doing the due diligence, talking to your customers, analyzing your competition and all of that, you can create more relevant communications that your target audience, right? There's no one size fits all. You got 10 vertical markets. The people in those vertical markets, while there's similar issues, what resonates with them is different. And so if you're doing a one size fits all, you're going to fail. If you're not talking to me in your communications, and you're talking to the CFO, and yet you're targeting me as a marketer, it's not going to be relevant to me. I don't know why you're talking to me, because there's nothing there. And so that's why I say the strategy part and understanding how you're perceived internally, externally, what your competition is doing. By taking all this information, you can, create, here's who we are, here's what we want to be, here's where we reside in the vertical markets that we serve. And they know us really well here, and they do a great job in whatever, education. But over here in convenience stores, right, quick service, we don't have a strong reputation or image or people that understand who we are. Yet that's a great opportunity. So now we need to spend some time in changing that. Well, I just don't all of a sudden just start marketing me. I've got to go in and understand how I'm going to change your perception, your attitude, your behavior to get me to consider. Why? Because, as marketing, that's our job. And so there's that disconnect. it's like, yeah, we got a problem. Revenues are down. We just need to advertise more. We need to go do social media. We need to go do these things. And my answer is maybe. I had a prospect that's got, we need to be on TikTok. I was like, dude, you sell industrial, widgets that nobody on TikTok really cares about. Now you can be on there if you want. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of money. None of your competition's there, and I guarantee that a dancing pipe is not going to. I'm saying it's by getting people to understand. You have to put forth relevant messages that your prospects can relate to. And unless you're doing due diligence, unless you're having, spend that time to extract that from the market, you're just guessing. And there's a lot of case studies that guessing led to failure. Most strategies fail. I think the latest stat that I use is 92%. But most strategies fail due to poor implementation. So even then, you could have a great strategy, but you don't execute it properly. One of the things we find, and we've argued with companies, is like, you just spent 9 months with me, and now you're going to have the junior person who doesn't really get it execute it all. I guarantee you're going to call me back up in 6-7 months and say, hey, it didn't work. I'll tell you, I'll save you a lot of time and energy. It won't work. Why? Because unless you're managing that, it's easy to get off track. And that's where companies, other things I think where they fail, it's consistently monitoring, consistently making sure that things are being communicated properly. Competitive analysis is a great example. We'll do a competitive analysis, and I always recommend we should set up a program so it's ongoing. Let's find somebody to do the due diligence and to manage it, and we'll take that data and right? Because we don't want to do that. So what, we can do it again next year? A lot happens during that year. If you're not paying attention, you have an issue. Same thing with market. What's new? What's disruptive coming into the market? Look at AI. Oh my God. A year and a half ago, I ran a seminar, presentation in one of my groups, and there was 4 of us. And I talked about, how long AI has been around and, where it is today. And I did a little survey, and there was 40 people in the room, and, how many have used AI? And about half of them said they did. And for the most part, it was all ChatGPT. Right? Just prior to that, I'd heard some digital agency guy stand up and said, I fired all my copywriters. We're only using ChatGPT. So a year later, I spent the last 7 months working with an AI company, and we were asked to give the same presentation that we gave a year and a half ago next month to a company, to another networking group. And I called the 4 people up and I said, there's no way that if we were in with this, what we did, a year and a half ago, we're going to be laughed out of them, right? It's all changed. Yeah. It's so much. And so that is very disruptive. People are throwing a lot of stuff out there. They're basically skinning, ChatGPT and calling it an app or some kind of AI agent. And, you don't even need to do that. You just go on and you can figure out the prompt yourself, right? But that is so disruptive that it's changing. Just like if you go back many years ago, and I'm going to date myself a little, but there used to be a time when, a client wanted an ad. It might take 40 days or 45 days to do an ad. Then the Mac came out, and everybody and their brother became a creative director, right? And now everybody and their brother is an AI agent builder. If you just really scan what's out there, it's like, oh my God, it's like every day I get email after email after email, and it's, unless you're living in that world, it's confusing as heck. And I'm maybe off tangent a little bit, but and so there's that, but that's tactical. It's all tactical stuff. And so that's where companies that's all about, I need to fix this. It's not communicating. My SEO is off. Well, why is it off? What are you doing? Well, you don't blog. You don't do any content. And then you tell me you got SEO problems. The last, we blog. your last blog was in 2022.
Mm-hmm.
It's not blogging, right? And so we see this kind of disparity of things that are going on, but it's all rooted in the tacticals not working. But a lot of times it's nothing to do with that. It's all that strategy stuff and understanding. Inside sales team as this last year, there were 2 people. We grew it to 5, but the 2 people who'd been there for well over a year, sitting 5 feet from each other, had completely different stories that they were telling prospects. Mm. Totally inconsistent. The way they did things, their process flow of identifying leads. So the tactics didn't work. Why? Because all the other stuff didn't work. You were just, throw garbage in, garbage out, right? So.
Well, and I think this goes back to kind of when we're talking about like company brand. Like if you're not talking about your company in the company, it comes back to that, because your salespeople, they'll say anything to get a sale. No offense to salespeople, I used to be a salesperson, but whatever I needed to say to make the sale happen that was somewhat true and legal, I was gonna say, right, because that's my livelihood. Right. Yeah. So that you can't really blame sales if you're not willing to put in the work and show them the path, which is what essentially you're doing when you come in, and showing them this is how we're going to all grow, not just the 2 salespeople.
Right. And it really depends on your structure. Like I just had a conversation and, they deal with dealer network, but they have, 13 people out in company people out in the field dealing with their dealers. Now I have no idea what they say or what they do, and there's a lot of stuff. It was a kind of a first phone call, but that's a different structure than the person that has outside sales or running an inside sales program, right? So it all gets back to that. What's the process? What's the infrastructure of what's going on? You say you're X, and I go to your website and it doesn't reflect that whatsoever. Or you've got 15 vertical markets, and are you really strong in 15 vertical markets? I dealt with a med tech company last year, and they had 10 vertical markets, and they say, yes, we're in the airline industry, aerospace. And I was like, really? I've never even could figure out what product or service you're doing in there. And all the medical stuff, it was, paragraphs and pictures. And you got to the aerospace, and it was like, 3 sentences. Mm-hmm. I said, you got to take that stuff off, or we've got to really put a concentrated effort in it. And do you have the infrastructure to do that? Strategy? No, you don't. If you do, now we're going to figure out what's the strategy to do it, and then what are the supporting tactics to make that happen? How are we going to train your sales force? How are we going to train operations? Do we have the infrastructure and the people to do that? And one of the things we looked at, for example, in that, we're looking at adjacent markets. Forget the other 10. We're looking at a new adjacent markets, and one of them was robotics. And it was like, okay, that looks really promising. Everything we do translates, except we're missing some key people. And therefore, without those people, we can't go venture into that market. Just like aerospace and everything else, right? We can say we do it, but you don't really do it. Mm-hmm. You have no supporting evidence for it. And so can we scale it back? Can we be strategic in how we approach it? I worked with a company in the home compostable straw market. Very sexy. But plastic bans all over the United States. Not in every state. Some states. And some states had a state ban, county bans, and city bans. Mm-hmm. And they were all different. And so, for example, I was asked by a major QSR chain, said, we want to replace all our plastic with yours, but all yours. It has to fit in every market we're in. And we couldn't do it because of all the different regulations, right? And so now do we strategically. So one strategy, of course, would be to get a lobbyist and start going to those states and starting to get but that's a long game.
Yeah.
And so we had, we broke it down. We looked, where were the leads coming from? Where were all the headquarters for these various companies that we were targeting? And then how do we put a strategy in to go get those? Then we need to say, okay, now how do we message for quick service, convenience store, hotel, hospitality, cruise line, all those different areas. And then do we have the people to support it? And then blah, 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 right? So all that kind of strategic thinking before you put boots on the ground, or you start sending out messages and those kinds of things. So
All right. And so I want to, because as I think, and again, I'm a scatterbrain, so it goes everywhere. So one thing that I was wondering was, the right time to bring on a fractional CMO. Now, when I'm assuming some of these companies that you're mentioning are established. They sound established, right? And then, so what makes them think, hey, I should bring on a fractional CMO as opposed to a full-time CMO? And then, because I think also at the same time, when you have newer companies, when you have startups, at what point do they think that I need to? Because I think, for the latter company, for the startup, it's just they don't have money to hire
right.
someone full time. But for an established company, what is it? Because sales are slipping, and they're like, you know what, we just need a helping hand, or so in both of those. So in the same question each time, when is the right time to bring on a fractional CMO?
Yeah, well, startups are interesting, or small companies, because it's, hey, I need the help, but I can't afford you, right? And then even then, I actually just went through this with a startup. I really liked it. I thought it made sense, and so I took equity instead of money. And I hadn't done that in a while. I had to convince my wife to let me do it again, because I got a whole lot of pieces of paper that says I own a lot of companies that don't exist anymore. And it was exciting, but as we were going through, all of a sudden I realized that the founder, who was really tech, he was a great CTO, probably not a great CEO. But as we started going through it, people like myself, the fractional COO and the CSO, they started using us like technical people. Like I'd get an email and says, "I need you to make a post on LinkedIn." I was like, "I'm sorry, what?" And so even with the counsel that we did, he couldn't get himself off of, I just need people to execute stuff. And ultimately it didn't work out because the strategy was wrong. But he wouldn't listen, why? Because he was a founder, and he had done it before, and therefore I know everything. So so that's usually the harder part in the younger companies. I do some mentoring at one of the universities, and I was called in to mentor this young team, and they had an interesting subscription shoe business. And their basic premise was, let's say a young girl is going to go to the prom. She can't afford to buy a new pair of shoes or whatever, but she can rent shoes. And so she would rent the shoes, she would wear the shoes, she would return the shoes, and then they would donate the shoes to charity. I liked it. My question was, so how did you vet this idea? Did you do any research? Oh, absolutely. I talked to my mom, my dad, my cousin, my sister, my brother. They all loved it. Did you talk to anybody besides family? Yeah, my friends. Okay. Anybody besides your friends? Did you actually go out and do any testing? No. So then it was, we think our best strategy is to hire a PR firm that works in the luxury space. And I said, I think that's a horrible idea. You don't have a lot of money. And I can guarantee you a New York PR firm is going to suck your dry. You're not even going to make a month with these guys. And they didn't listen to me. And they did exactly what I told them not to do, long story short. And then, it failed within 6 or 8 months. So I find with those startups and even young companies that the owners are just, I know my path, I know what I want to do, and this is the way it's going to go. So I tried to stay away from them for the most part, because it's not the battle. I've had that call. It's like, I want you to do X, Y, and Z, and I said, I'm not going to do that. That's not how I work. Why? I go, this is just not how I work, and I'll try to explain it to them. And eventually I say, look, I'll give you some names of people to call. They're happy to execute. But surprisingly, it always surprises me, even companies that have been around for 20 and 30 years, you sit down with them and it's like, in my mind, I don't say it out loud, how in the heck did you make it this far? It's just chaos. But you know what? They hit a niche, or they have something that's going on, and there's money coming in, there's cash in the bank, and then but that, how do you sustain that? And again, while you're business for 20 years, that's great. There are a lot of times we've been getting involved a lot in kind of M&A acquisition, and looking at companies that want to sell but they can't, not quite there, and they need to, they're being told stay in business for another 3 to 5 years, get your revenue up. And so I'll get this phone call and say, hey, this guy needs to, really drive revenue. They're at 10 million now and they want to be 50 in 3 years. I go, yeah, but they've been in business for 35 years and they're only 10. And in 3, they want to, quadruple what they've done. What's different? So I think there's just confusion in a lot of that. But so a lot of those companies are like, we need help. We're not where we need to be. Revenues are shrinking. We think our messaging is wrong. Those are the triggers where somebody either recommended me in or they've decided that they need someone like me. So back to your question, when do they decide that it's a full-time versus a part-time, fractional? I think it's a little bit of price-driven. It's a little bit of, I could go spend a lot of money to hire somebody full-time. I've never done that before. I've never really had anybody like a CMO. How am I going to keep them busy? That's the other one I get. How do I keep a full-time person busy? And so, for me, it's like, let's figure out how much time you need. What's the real assignment? What are we trying to do? And then we can either adjust up or down based on your need. Now, if you get to a point where I had an assignment a couple of years ago, they were using me, if you do an 8-hour day, they were using me 3 days a week. And I could have been 5. And eventually that's what happened. They hired a full-time person because I wasn't interested. So I think that there's a misunderstanding about why you need someone like me. And then again, that marketing, that M and that CMO tends to trigger people to think about tactics and to get them to really understand that what we're doing is the digging into data, analyzing, looking at ways to bring the product or services to market, and to drive the tactical stuff, but not physically do the tactical stuff, and making sure those implementers, whether it's an agency or whatever, is following through on everything you've just done. And surprisingly, I've worked, prior to my agency days, which I've worked with global companies, but even as an independent, I worked with a financial services company at 140 million. I worked within the luxury space, 160 million, but they didn't have a me. And so, the owner was directing, or there was, no real direction. So that happens as well.
So now, because you mentioned, so I have 2 questions to follow up. And so the first one is, when you have a company that is either calling you because of they want to be ready for sale in a few years, or they're just calling. So since you're quote unquote fractional part-time, the assumption is at some point down the road, they're going to hire someone full-time. Like that should be the general assumption, unless they're going to be for sale, one or the other. How do you balance the strategy of a short-term strategy versus setting them up for the long term? Like, how do you do that balancing act? Because I feel like it's probably not the easiest, because if you're doing long term, then the growth that you're expecting is smaller. But when you're hiring a fractional person, you're expecting something relatively quick. So how do you balance that?
Yeah, you see the gray. It's twofold, and I've every assignment I go into, I know it's going to end. You can take a job, full-time job. You don't go into it going, I'm only going to be here for 6 months, or I'm going to be here for a year, right? You go in thinking it's long-term. What we do is we go in hoping for the long-term, if you will, and knowing that it's short-term. Because it kind of, again, depends. There's been situations where, things are going really well, things are growing, and they don't want to change it. And then one day they hit, like it just happened to me last year, manufacturing company, they had the compostable straw guys. I was there 3.5 years. And then one day it was, now we're bringing somebody in. Things have changed. And it was across the country, so it all made sense. Um, and then, I'm 3 years with a client and 2 years with another client. Yet in between, I've had stuff that lasted 90 days, 6 months, 8 months, 8 months on a fractional, typical fractionals about where it stands. Things are in place. We've done all this due diligence, and then they get to a point. It's like, okay, do I really want to pay your rate to do implementation? And my positioning is, I'll work with your people. If you don't have people, I'll bring in people. I'll hire people. I'll work with some of my team. I don't really care as long as you have the capabilities or the team in place can execute what we need to get done. So on the flip side, it's as I tell people, it isn't just about what I do. It's about what we do. And so this was last year. I had a call, CEO, and he wants to hire me, but he wants a guarantee. I need a guarantee. I said, I can't give you a guarantee. A lot of the stuff I do, there's no guarantee. It's research, it's data. I said, well, the implementation side, I need a guarantee. And I said, I can't. And so we debated this for 20 minutes. And so finally I said to him, you know what? I'll give you a guarantee. I just figured out a way. And he goes, great, what is it? I said, I need your job. I need to be the CEO of the company. And he goes, what do you mean? I said, because then I can guarantee everything that I think needs to be done to get where we need to go can be done. And so that's a little bit of the disconnect is I can make strategies, I can make recommendations, I can even do some of it. But ultimately, I need all these other people to be participatory. It isn't just me, and so if the message is wrong or it takes too long. I mean, I worked for the company. It's like when I first started working with them, they go, yeah, we blog, and they had an outside digital agency writing their blogs, and they said, yeah, but that we have to rewrite them all the time because they're just not right. And I go, well, how long have you been working with them? 2 years. So you've been working with a company that doesn't understand you, number one. Number two, writes blogs that you have to spend time rewriting. Yes. Then it goes through a 7-person approval process, including operations, customer service, sales, the CEO, the COO. And it's like, why are these people involved in this? And so that, again, caused some problems and issues and flows. So over the next 8 months, we got all that straightened out. We figured out the size of the market. We laid new strategies. And then it was like, okay, we're good. Everything looks good. We love what you're doing, blah, blah, blah. But, we've got internal people now that will run with it. So that's usually what we hear. Sometimes there's lingering. You come in once a week or twice a week and, oversee the people, but you're not engaged the way we are, for those initial 8 months. So that's always the challenge. And, but because we sit in the C-suite, we have much more visibility than say if I was just, the digital agency executing and working with the marketing person, right? So we're sitting, and so we can hear all these different things and contribute on these different levels. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And the thought process that you mentioned of, hoping for long term but knowing that it's probably short term, I think that it makes a lot of sense and also saves some heartache, right? At the end of the day, if you're expecting long term and you're really expecting long term, especially when fractional means you're not going to be there all the time, that absolutely makes sense. And then going into, so you just mentioned, when I asked the question, I talked about the M&A portion of it. So you've written in the past that, and I feel like I'm being accusatory when I'm saying this. I'm not. I just my research, but that the CMO should be at the table when we're talking about mergers and acquisitions. So, tell me about that. Like how
Sure.
and how and why.
Okay, so I did some work over a year ago, and at the end of everything we were doing, size of market, all this stuff, it became apparent because they didn't share one piece of information with me. And that is they actually wanted to sell the company, and they got they called it a bad valuation. It was a poor valuation. They didn't get what they wanted, and they'd have been in business for 40 years. They're older, they don't like each other, all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, when I saw the work that we did and realized what we were doing, it was like, well, this is interesting because this is just what I do. And it was all about getting them to a position of sale. So in doing a lot of due diligence and thinking about all of this, it's like, I don't have to really change anything I do. I just need to become more visible. So I started talking to a lot of brokers, and partially is, look, if you got a client that didn't get the valuation they were looking for, or the EBITDA is not quite there, and they need to continue to grow their business, which means they need more sales, they need more profitability. And, I think I said this before, they've been in business 20 years, and now all of a sudden they want to, triple their business in 3. What are they going to do differently? That's a great recommendation, to come in, do an assessment, really kind of tear it apart, look at it, figure out a way to make that happen, and put a program together. Now they can either hire me to help execute, but I'm fresh eyes. I have no egos in it. I'm just going to tell you the truth. It's like that one company I was just talking about. At one point in time, I had to tell them nobody was going to buy their business at the end of the year, and I thought for sure they would have fired me at that point in time, but they didn't. I was still there for another 90 days. And so then it flipped. So I got invited to. I knew there was a seminar going on about acquisitions, a 3-part series from a group I belong, a new group that I belong to. A lot of M&A lawyers and investment bankers and fractional CFOs and all this stuff. I'm the only marketing guy. And so we're putting these things together, and I said, well, I want to moderate, I want to be on the panel. And so one of the VCs, he says, well, I'm not sure I understand why you sit at the table or why you're involved. And I said, well, let's put it this way. All I've heard you guys talk about is finance. So EBITDA, and the numbers are clean and blah, blah, blah. That's great. Of course, you want to make a good acquisition. But I never heard anything say about how do we put these companies together? How do we judge culture? Do the cultures match? A lot of times when you put a company together, back to something that happened to me, everything changed. And it was no longer a place I wanted to work. And so as a senior guy, I left. So they just lost that investment, right? So how do you put the companies together? How do you make the decision? Is it one company now? Or is there an overarching organization and then you've got these divisions under? How do you put that together? Are you gaining products that you didn't have? What's the profitability of those products? What's the customer base? How do you look at cannibalization of those customers? By doing what you just did you just alienate? Does it open any new markets for you? How are you going to go after those markets? So that's all kind of that work that I do. And so after talking to this VC, he was like, I get it. And so I was able to look at, those kind of 2 different vertical markets, if you will. Somebody who wants to sell but can't, and then somebody who already identified a target now is the right target. And even if they already made the acquisition, how do you put it all together? And so that's where I've pushed into trying to help companies just get beyond, hey, great, we made a good acquisition, the EBITDA is great, adding profitability, but now what happens? And you got duplicate people, you got mixed cultures. Now you got to deal with the market. Is there market confusion? I prefer to be brought in before the acquisition, but is there going to be confusion? If you put these 2 companies together, somebody's going to go, "What? I don't understand why this is logical," or "How's it going to help me? Now I'm concerned. I've got issues." Whatever it happens to be. The spending time to really dissect all that and to say, here's how, based on everything we know, here's a recommended way to put it together. You need an overarching brand, but let's keep these companies separate. They're more synergistic that way because now you can upsell and do all these other things versus if it's underneath, now you've got product issues. Again, I'm making this stuff up, right? But yeah, but really kind of getting into it, and that's where I saw opportunities.
it's funny because I feel like when it comes to mergers, the questions that you're asking are often missed, and it's more so, how does the let's example like my company makes $40 billion, your company makes 20, are we at 60? And usually it's like, okay, but how do you get to 60? Right? Or do you just end up at 45? Or are all these people, because some people buy companies because it's, oh, we just want the business they have, but you're going to lose the people who create the business, right? So the questions you ask, I mean, those are being someone who's gone through a merger, seeing those questions not being asked, right? It's just like very apparent. All right, switching gears a little bit. So we've been talking about company perspective a lot. I want to jump towards, for people that are listening that are aspiring fractional CMOs, that really, because now anyone in any industry that in the last few years hasn't loved the job market, a lot of people have switched over to fractional. I've seen it in we've talked about it in every market. Let's start at, what are red flags that you watch out for when deciding to work with a company? What is the main thing that, because look, I can already tell from the conversations that the conversation we're having right now, that you do your best to kind of not be accommodating, but understand their perspective and help them get to where they want to go, which is fine, right? Because, you're always going to end up working with some sort of difficulty when it comes to people. People are difficult. It's just who we are. What's the red flags that, like, this is not, I absolutely should not work with XYZ situations?
Yeah, I think that anybody who's fractional, freelance, whatever it happens to be, the goal is, how do you keep the pipeline full? If you know it's going to end, right? So, I mean, I do a tremendous amount of networking every week, every month. Why? Because, you hope for the long-term clients. I happen to have 2 long-term clients right now that are really great, and, putting in the other stuff. But you're always in the pursuit of, how do I find the next one? How do I find the next one? But there's that, and I've been guilty of this, but it's like, hey, you're a warm body, you might need me, I'm gonna take you on. And I always advise people, keep in mind, they're vetting you, but you got to be vetting them. Mm-hmm. You can tell them that personality. It's back to the story, right? The guys, I need a guarantee. Well, I already knew I was never going to work with the guy. Mm-hmm. Because if he's difficult today, he's going to be difficult tomorrow. I actually had somebody call me up as a referral and said, I just want you to know, so-and-so referred me to you, but I want you to know right off the bat, I don't believe in marketing. And it's like, well, why are we talking?
Yeah.
And he goes, convince me. And I said, no, I won't. He goes, why? I said, because if I have to convince you today, I have to convince you tomorrow and the next day and the next day, and you can't afford that. And mentally, I can't afford that, right? And so I think step back, take a breath, because ultimately you put yourself in a bad situation, it's going to go bad. And so there's plenty of opportunities, and you got to have your own. I have my own. I drink my own Kool-Aid. I'm very aggressive. Obviously, you've been reading my articles and stuff, but it's making sure that a client that's difficult takes away from what you do, which means it also impacts other clients. And so, while we all want the next project, the next piece of work, and things like that, not every business is good business, and that's the simple way to put it. You have to make sure they fit within who you are and your culture. It's understanding. I had an incident recently where I was brought in for one thing. I started talking about my process. They loved it. I wanted to engage with that. And then it was like, well, I'm not sure I can really afford you, and do all these kinds of things. So I panicked a little bit and said, okay, well, maybe I'll just give them this little nugget. Mm-hmm. And I was like, why are you just giving me the nugget? I wanted everything. I go, yeah, but you told me you were cheap. And so he goes, well, I panicked because you changed. And I said, I didn't change anything. I said, so let's level set. Yes, absolutely. And for a period of time, I was going, man, oh man, is this really what I want? Turned out to be the nicest people. Mm-hmm. It just, they don't do this. And so it was just all new to them and confusing to them. And so, But there was a period of time it got real close to me saying, look, I don't think we're right.
Mm-hmm.
Because why, right? It'd be a decent project, but if I'm having to, be on the phone every other day trying to justify what I'm doing, and all, I mean, it's just not going to work. So yeah, so my advice to anybody who's listening is, not every business is good business, and to make sure that it fits with what you want to do, kind of time it's going to suck away versus the money that you're going to make, and don't be afraid to ask for what you think you're worth. A lot of times somebody one time said to me, well, that's too expensive. I could hire somebody to do that for, I'm making it up. I think, let's say I said $1,000. And they go, well, I could hire somebody to do it for $500. I said, I could hire somebody to do it for $1. It'll be crap, but I could do that. Okay, it's not the point. And for me, it's like, you got to look at, you're not buying an hour of my time or 10 hours of my time. You're getting, 30 plus years of experience. Agency, corporate. I've been through acquisitions. I sold my company. I've done all this stuff. I've worked with clients all over the world. That's what you're getting, not somebody to execute your social media, right? And so to get people to understand, you got to pull back. It's that experience. I recently, a friend of mine announced that he's going to be a fractional CMO, and it's like, dude, you're a teacher for 20 years, and you're a tactician now, and now you're going to compete with me? Okay.
I mean, you make it look so good, Angelo. That's why they're, but it's funny you say it, because this reminds me of the parable of like, someone calls a plumber, and the plumber comes and sees the issue and just, does one little tightening and walks away. It's like, okay, $300 bill. It's like, you were here for 2 seconds. You only turned one pipe. It's like, yeah. It's $1 for the turning and $299 for knowing where to turn, yeah, right? Exactly. And that's what it comes down to. No, absolutely, and I think you actually both things. All business isn't good business, but then also that what you mentioned about initially, it did seem like it wouldn't work out, but they were the nicest people. They just didn't know how to negotiate or how to actually talk about what they could afford. So maybe not jumping to conclusions too quickly, just understanding the whole process. But that's awesome. And then. Okay, so now I want to talk about one thing that controversial, but not really, sales versus marketing, right? The royal rumble of creating revenue. From my understanding, from what I'm reading, it doesn't have to be a versus, but often it starts off that way. I feel like and I don't know if it is because people don't understand the synergies that could be there, or because, some people are more rigid. So I want to start with, why is that the perception that exists across many, belief systems, that it's sales versus marketing? And then how does one come into that kind of an environment and make it happy?
So, yeah, I mean, it's prevalent, and it does, that conversation, I actually get asked that a lot, or make jokes, right? Sales and marketing and fighting all the time. And I go, it's been there. I remember the first time I went corporate, and I was in the marketing department. I was a product manager at the time, and we had I think he was probably just I don't know if he was a marketing manager or VP, but he reported to the VP of sales. And man, they used to just have downright screaming matches at each other. So that was my first exposure of really understanding that, why are you guys fighting? Well, the VP of sales saw the marketing guy as a little more subservient. The marketing guy was like, yeah, you can't do any of this stuff unless we tell you how to go do it, right? And so I've seen that over the years, even pretty bad in a client back in 2018, where there was no real marketing person, but the person that was kind of in charge of a lot of the stuff was more of a graphic artist, and man, she used to just hold it over everybody's head, and her and the VP of sales would argue all the time. So going in there, part of my job was, for example, was to figure out, okay, what's really going on, and how do I figure out how to do that? Interestingly enough, part of her issue was she didn't feel she was getting the respect that she needed, right? But it was the door. It was a revolving door. Like, she'd be working on something, and somebody would walk in and demand they needed something from sales, and that kept happening. And so therefore she kept building up resistance, And then when her the sales team didn't get it, they went to the VP of sales. He came running in and basically told her. And ironically, one of the big solutions was we set up office hours. And so every day she had a block that anybody could come in and talk to her. And it sounded silly, but it was like, when you got to go see your professor or whatever, he has office hours, and that's when he's there. That's when we'll make yours, right? So we looked at just those dynamics and expectations. You say you need a design. Well, to her, design is this beautiful thing, and to you, it was like, hey, I need a sketch on a piece of paper. And so then you're mad because she took so much time to create all this stuff, and yet you had to disconnect what you need. So that does happen. And so in those environments, when we're there, we try to understand. A company I dealt with, the marketing department was pretty junior, and sales would just tell them what they wanted all the time. Well, the COO didn't want that to happen. It was one of the reasons why they brought me in, was to fix so sales wasn't dominating. But there were a lot of other dynamics and issues going on, so it was like talking to sales, trying to understand what their expectations were, and really just understanding those dynamics and then putting things in place to try to mitigate that. I have to say, after 8 months, it never totally didn't change, but not totally. And so we had to, telling the salespeople no, that still caused some issues. But it takes time to change culture and behavior. Mm-hmm. However, that being said, I think I said earlier, marketing and sales, as opposed to sales and whole life, sales and marketing. Well, now I'm going, it's marketing and sales. Why? Because we're at the top, they're at the bottom. Yes, we are together, the revenue engine. I need a T-shirt that says revenue engine. And so I've been fortunate to find, frankly, other fractional sales leaders that believe in that. So a lot of my referrals come actually from fractional salespeople. They get in there and yes, you have a revenue problem. Yes, but you got a bigger issue, right? You don't have any kind of lead gen program. Your messaging isn't resonating. Blah blah blah. You need to bring in the marketing guy to help that. So I jokingly say with this one particular friend of mine and guy I do a lot of work with, we sit around the campfire singing Kumbaya, right? Because we understand our roles. We understand synergistically how we work together, and so to find that is truly wonderful in the sense that everybody knows their roles and what we're doing, and then how we interconnect. We pass the baton at the right time. We take the feedback and making sure we're making changes. So it can happen, but it takes work.
So tell me if I'm wrong, because I feel like from my perspective of seeing how sales done in some companies, like if marketing is done right, sales becomes easier, right? Mm-hmm. I feel like the animosity or the anger, whenever sales is not excited about marketing, is because they've never had the support and they've had to do a lot of it themselves. Because I've seen companies, just their version of sales and marketing is a salesperson just dialing. Like, that's it, right? You get on the phone and you do 200 dials a day. Hopefully someone picks up, and hopefully, they're letting you call them back in a month, right? That's as far as it goes. So it's just like lack of exposure, because again, the funny thing about you mentioning the fractional salespeople is these are people that have done sales in many different places, so they can see what works and what doesn't. Mm-hmm. And so that's what makes them excited about marketing. Because I feel like if I was doing sales, I would want a robust marketing team, because that makes my life easy, almost like just easy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I getting people to understand that it, but you've been there, right? It's sales says, hey, it's I can't close any of these deals. The leads are crap. And marketing's going, well, I'm giving you really good quality leads. You just don't know how to close. Right? Mm-hmm. That's usually where the conversation starts to happen. Or, hey, I went to the trade show. My booth didn't show as well. It's your fault. Well, not necessarily, right? And so it's getting past some of that, and certainly ego's involved and those kinds of things. But yeah, I mean, I find in those relationships that it's to get there, and even going into a company, I sat with one yesterday, and there was a little bit of head sales guy came in, and I could tell right off the bat he was like, I need to do this and this and this, and I don't know how you're going to help me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I ask the question, what kind of marketing activities you doing to support what you're doing? They go, we don't do any. Okay, so yes, I understand why you maybe have some positioning and messaging problems and sales problems because you're not reinforcing who you are and what you're doing, and you know, you, if I go talk to your customers, am I going to hear, 10 different perceptions of who you are as a business? Probably. How do we get one cohesive one?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that helps to start to change it. But anyway, part of it is just understanding the personalities and trying to figure out, what the needs are, and I mean that's the job, right? If I was there full time or as a fractional, I still have to
Mm-hmm.
deal with personalities, right? We all have to deal with the personalities of the organization. I worked with a guy who he was a yeller. He liked to yell. He was yelling at me one day, and I was like, I wasn't even here. That was like 2 years ago. I wasn't even here when that happened. What are you yelling at me for? I'm not yelling at you. I'm just yelling. I go, well, you're going to give yourself a heart attack. There's no reason to yell.
Yeah.
Let's figure out what's going on, and we can try to fix it. But anyway.
I think yelling as a whole has, I think yelling was more common like a while, because now if someone yells in an office, at least from what I've seen, it's like shock. It's like, whoa. But I know that, especially from like hearing stories from my parents, like yelling was normal back in the day. Something happened, your boss yelled at you, it just happened. And now it's not as common. But anyway, I digress. All right. So I'm loving coming back to stuff. Thank you for writing so much on LinkedIn because it's giving me ammo right now. Okay. So you wrote about edgy tactics, right? So shock value in marketing, at least from what I've seen. So where should companies draw the line? Because I think we're in an age where, especially because now the ads are not just on television, right? They're not just on these controlled spaces. You're able to take an ad and not even make it a mainstream ad, but it's still something everyone talks about. So where is the line? And having these other avenues open up, has it moved the line than where it used to be?
Well, I think ultimately it all has to relate back to, your brand, if you will, right? It's shock value for the sake of shock value. It might be funny. It might, we've all seen those great videos, and then you go, well, what the hell was that all about?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, come on, in the recent Super Bowl, I forget which one it was. It was like, okay, they just spent whatever it was, $4 million on that, and I have no idea what they were selling. It was funny, but I have no idea what they're selling. So I think sometimes it's like, how do I disrupt through some kind of a shock value, if you will, but it still has to relate back to something that you're doing. Otherwise, it's just stuff, and it's funny. And I remember, do you remember BlendJet? I think it was BlendJet. It was, or Ninja. Maybe it was the Ninja.
Oh yeah. I know what you're talking about. It's the bullet.
The bullet. Thank you.
The bullet.
And they would like put phones in there and all that kind of stuff. That was brilliant because it was demonstrating that their thing was powerful. Mm-hmm. And they'd throw all sorts of crap in there and they'd grind it up. Now that was like, oh my God, that's great. Look, hey, they're going to throw an iPhone in there, right? But that was shock, but it was relatable to their product and told a story versus, here's a guy jumping off a cliff and bungee jumping, and it's like, oh, is he Red Bull? What is he doing?
Yeah.
Sneakers? I mean, I have no idea, right? And so I think that's sometimes where the disconnect happens, and again, back to spend 4 or 5, 10, whatever the number of dollars on the Super Bowl commercial, and you go, I don't know what you were selling, or does it make any sense? I'm not going to criticize anybody's commercial, but yeah, I mean, I think that it's important. Everybody wants that viral moment.
Yeah.
But does it help or hurt the company? A lot of people lose sight. We talk about brand and protecting the brand, but if you get beyond just the brand and think about the brand's reputation, we used to say, well, we do say, right? Branding and building your brand and positioning and achieving what you want takes time. I tell people, we're not going to become a brand overnight. It takes time. Marketing is the overnight stuff, right? We can change our tactics. We can do things to support where you want to be with the brand and to protect the reputation that you want to build. But it takes minutes, if not seconds, to destroy it.
Yeah.
With the technology and the channels that we have. It takes nothing to take all of that to flip it. And it's when somebody does it to you, but it's worse when you've done it to yourself.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, I feel like the chasing viral thing has caused, like, in general, commercials. Like, let's not just talk about the entire, like, process of marketing for these companies, but old school commercials were things that we would talk about, all like after the Super Bowl this year. Me and my friends didn't really talk about that many. I don't remember any of them, if I'm being very honest. But back in the day, it's like, oh, did you see like if I say Clydesdales, you think of Budweiser, right?
Yeah.
And it's just always, and they've had similar commercials for decades at this point, right? But each new one can be cooler one way or the other. Or in wintertime, you see a polar bear. It's probably Coca-Cola. So I feel, and a long time ago, Taco Bell had its little Chihuahua, which was, I don't know why they got rid of that thing. That Chihuahua was it's the best. They should bring it back. But I think nowadays, because they're chasing viral, because first of all, viral means under 30 seconds. And viral means we should be able to repeat it and it should be just quick. Because of that, if it's not viral, it's very forgettable. So that's I just wanted to say that because I love old school commercial. I love television. So for me, like, good commercial is great. All right. As we're wrapping up, all right. So usually I have this thing called FAQs, which are just rapid fire questions, but I actually have a couple of marketing FAQs, just a couple. So the first one was going to be, it's very simple, very basic. What's one piece of marketing advice you wish more founders, CEOs, business leaders would follow? Just one.
Just one. It's what I always say. Take the time to understand your market, your competition, your customers, your prospects. We're all in a hurry for the sale, but take the time to do due diligence to understand so you can create a better strategy. Everybody's in a hurry, right? We don't want to take the time. Research that. I don't want to take the time to do any research. We got to get out there right away. Okay.
Okay. Most overrated buzzword right now, marketing buzzword.
That's a good one. I'm not sure. I mean, my mind went right to fractional because everybody and their brother is a fractional, right? I think the you know what, it might be lead gen.
Okay.
Because I'm not sure people understand what it is because we're inundated. I am not kidding. I bet you when I go on my email, I've got at least 10, not 5, 10 emails from lead gen companies telling me how they're going to, make me $100,000 or do all this stuff. Now, one of the things I started doing was responding with, perfect. If you can guarantee this process, then I'll give you 25% of all the revenue you generate, which is going to be, but I don't want to pay you up front. So if you believe in your process, let's do that deal. Yeah. You know how many have responded? 0.
Yeah.
And I used to do the same thing with media. They go, our magazine's the best, and blah, 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 blah. I said, great. So let me run a free ad. And if the ad does what you say, I'll not only pay you for what that ad was, I'll double it. Mm-hmm. Well, I can't do that. Why? Don't you believe in your product? So, yeah, I think I'm going to stick with lead gen because, again, they're just inundated. And my favorite, of course, is, we can provide you the marketing help you need to grow your business. I go, really? Did you actually research my business?
Yeah.
I had this happen, sorry. But this young lady chased me for 6 months, a lead gen company. And she was pretty persistent. I knew she was young, and I said, okay, fine, let's have the conversation. And the day of the meeting, she doesn't show, but her boss shows up, the owner of the company, and he says, tell me about your business. Well, number one, I'm already put off because you just spent 6 months chasing me and you don't know anything about me.
Yeah.
So I said, fine. I told him. After 5 minutes, he goes, I'm sorry, we can't help you. And I said, well, let me give you a piece of advice. You need to train your people better. Mm-hmm. So anyway, sorry, I digress.
No. I mean, that's why research is one of those things when you're doing sales or lead gen or whatever it is. That's why I come to, like this podcast. I made sure I did research because that's the most important thing. But I totally get that. All right. This is, after this, I'll do the regular FAQs, but this is my favorite question out of all of these. And I'm very curious because I know what mine is. What is your favorite marketing campaign of all time for, any of the companies that are out there? Big or small?
Boy, of all time. Whew. So there's two parts of this story. Actually, Bud Frogs was probably one of my favorites. Years later, I ended up, when I had my agency at the time was marketing. We did media, we did strategy, we did research, we had no creative. And we ended up teaming up with a creative team that were ex-Darcy people that moved out here, and they came out to work on Mazda. They didn't like it, and they started a boutique firm. And it turned out to be, ultimately, we actually merged, and we were acquired, and we became a new agency. But they was actually the team that did all the Bud Frog stuff, and a lot of the Budweiser stuff. Yeah. So it was just ironic that was one of my favorites because it was just off-key enough that it was relatable and memorable, right? And in hearing him tell the story, it was like this one of those days that the marketing guy was like, all right, anything you want. You're not hitting the strategy. We just want to be just off the wall. And that's, there was no real direction for it, if you will, and that's what they came up with. I think some of the extensions started to get a little weird, but those are the first few commercials I thought. And I still remember it. When you were talking earlier and you mentioned Clydesdales, my mind actually went right to the Bud Frogs.
Yeah. Mine is the Apple's, 1,000 songs in your pocket. I think and mind you, I wasn't, I was quite young when that came out, but when I was reading about it later, I was like, that's such a, that's not even a marketing strategy. That's just a tagline, but it does the job of many different things. Right. And it's
absolutely.
just, so, yeah, I love it. All right. And so now, this will be really quick. These are not marketing based. It's just for you and us getting to know you better. What is, and you mentioned putting something on a t-shirt before, but if you were going to put something on a billboard or on a t-shirt for billions of people to see, what would that be? Anything you want.
Anything. So I jokingly say this all the time, but it's not necessarily a joke. If you can imagine a graph, right? Age along the bottom. Yeah, age along the bottom. Tolerance. And so when you're young, your tolerance is way up here, but as you get older, it swings down. So I have this visualization as basically don't screw with me kind of thing, and that graph just showing that my tolerance level has gotten really, really small, my BS meter, if you will. And I keep saying that jokingly that I'm going to make that T-shirt, but I never have.
I love it. And now this will be here forever. So if you ever do, put the link in the show notes. All right. And so, okay, best advice you ever got, or your favorite quote, one or the other.
The best advice, but two. One is pay it forward. That when I was younger, I remember talking to one of my bosses and saying, man, I really appreciate everything you're doing and you're teaching me, and it's like I wish I could pay you back for everything you've taught me. And he said, you will. Someday you're going to have the opportunity to do what I've done. And so I took that to heart, and I do that quite a bit. What was the other one? What was the question again?
Best advice you ever got, or your favorite quote?
Best advice. was listen. And I've spoken on this, and I don't know, maybe it's on my website, I don't remember, but active listening. People don't listen. They react. When people are having conversations, they're thinking about how can I jump in and tell my story that relates to what you just said. And so it's a pet peeve of mine that I want to make sure that you're done. I want to, follow up with questions, depending on the nature of it. But people just tend not to listen. And so somebody said, listen, when you're talking to a prospect or a client, they're telling you their story. You want to ask questions. You want to probe. You want to be curious, which is from the Ted Lasso. You ever see that spot?
Yes.
I love that, right?
The darts.
And by the way, Ted Lasso's coming back.
Yeah, season 4.
Season 4.
Yeah.
And so it's that. Actually, I'm sitting here with a podcast that I thought about doing called. Anyway, it's about listening to what's going on and being that person versus let me tell you my story, and so that has become a pet peeve of mine over the years, and it's actually one of my blogs about active listening. I don't know if you saw that one, but that started a whole chain reaction of stuff.
Yeah, and it's funny because whenever there's an argument, there's this psychological study that if you ask the person who just said a grievance out loud, if you ask the other person, what did this person say, many times it's not the right thing. It's not word for word, right? Marriage counselors talk about it too, where it's like if you are having an argument with your partner, make sure that they know what you're saying, right? Because people aren't always listening. So I love that. And that's awesome. Number 2. Okay. Best investment that you've ever made, whether it be financial, time, anything.
Boy, best investment. I mean, probably my house. But I think it's going to sound, I don't know, it won't sound corny, but it's in my kids.
Mm.
I grew up in a small town, and my dad was very involved. I mean, he was like, hey, you can ride a bike, go get a paper route. It really kind of taught a lot of lessons, and so I've worked hard to get my kids to be self-sufficient. But the thing I'm most proud of is they like each other. Mm. And so, yeah, I'm not sure that was the right answer, but that's what I'm
Sounds like a great answer. Sounds like a great answer.
And they like me. And they like me.
That's a big one. That's a big one. All right, 2 more, and then we'll start to wrap up. Best thing you've ever been gifted, or the thing that you like to gift the most.
Huh.
I like these questions because it makes you think. That's
yeah,
the
it
whole
really
point
does.
of this. I
I'm
love
trying
it.
to think what I've been gifted or have gifted. It's so I play music, and I played in a couple bands. I played in maybe in total 5 or 6 bands. But I remember I had taken a hiatus, and my oldest, who was at say 12 at the time, 11, 12, came to me and said, hey, I want to learn how to play guitar. And I said, great. I said, I just happened to have one. I pulled it out from under the bed, and I opened it up, and it was a Stratocaster. And he looked at it and he goes, well, I don't want to play that old guitar. And I go, oh yeah, no, you don't. Folded it back up, shoved it back under the bed. But I took him to the Guitar Center and bought him a guitar. But the fact that we were doing it inspired me to start playing again. Mm-hmm. So of course I had to buy myself a new guitar. But that was that incident. It had turned into 3 more bands that I played with, and had some opportunities to play with guys like Eddie Money and Mike Reno from Loverboy at a weekend charity event, and it was really cool. So a lot of memories. But I'd been out of it for 10 years.
Yeah.
Hadn't played guitar, I hadn't played drums, I hadn't done anything. So that one incident and his request, and he only played for a couple of years and he dropped it and sold everything. But that changed kind of my musical trajectory again.
Oh, that's awesome. A gift that you gave was a gift back to you. It worked out
exactly.
perfectly. I love that. All right, last question. Book that you have gifted the most, or your favorite book, or a book that you'd recommend that everyone should read.
Well, I'm a big fan of Good to Great. Jim Collins
Yeah.
is one of my favorites. But I'm actually a huge fan of Sun Tzu. And not only his book, but I've actually read a book that was translated by somebody for more business, really making that connection to business. And I feel there's such wisdom in his writings, from strategy and all the different aspects. So I'm a huge fan of that. But let me see if so I'm going to stand up for a second.
Oh,
No, actually not, because I'm probably wearing my pajamas. But there was a book that I gave out during COVID. It was called Promises, and it was very inspirational, and it was really to help people uplift. Here, let me take a look. It's called Stay Positive is what the book was called. I knew it had a P in it, and I ordered a bunch, and I would send them out to it and friends, and it was such a positive, inspiring that, and I loved giving it to people to read, and it was a tough time during COVID, and so probably that was the book that at the time I was sending out the most. But I like to read. I'm a big Jack Reacher fan, so I read Lee Child stuff a lot. But from the business standpoint, those are, and I say Sun Tzu, and they go, "Yeah, I read it," but I mean, I probably, I don't know how many times I read it.
Yeah.
So I'm a big fan of what he did.
I'll say that Sun Tzu is you can read it, but digesting it is a different game. Because I've read Art of War 3 times. And I think the last time I was like, oh wait, right? Like it's not just reading the words; it's actually digesting it. Because it's not I don't want to say it's not complex, but like you can go through it fairly easily. But you're probably not digesting more than a third or a quarter of it, because it goes deep. But stay positive. That last question is me being selfish, because I love to read, so I just need book recommendations all the time. So I'll check that out. And then Jack Reacher, are you watching the Amazon show?
Oh, absolutely.
It's so good. It's so much better. Well, no offense to Tom Cruise, but so much better than the films, in my opinion.
Well, Tom Cruise, but Tom Cruise was not Jack Reacher.
Yeah, it's not exactly. It's not
the character. As a matter of fact, if you look at the actor Alan
Richardson,
Reichson or something like that. Yeah. If you look at him in the first season, versus the second and third, he really beefed up. I mean, he even got bigger.
Yeah.
So
we have to make up for the height. I think he's like a couple inches shorter than Jack Reacher's supposed to be, so he has to get wider because he can't get taller.
Yeah, exactly. He's still not quite there, but he did. He's doing a great job, and so it's funny. I've probably watched the first series, I don't know, 3 or 4 times. I've watched the second. So I when everybody changed to one release a week, it just I try to go, okay, I'm going to wait till they're all out, but that never happens. But I'll go back and I'll watch them all. And then, I might be sitting around at night saying, I need some action. And you know what? I'm just going to go watch. Like Terminal Man. I've watched that thing 3 or 4 times. Or the Tomorrow War. I think I probably watched that 5 times. Because I was like, I need some action. And I know this has got a lot of action. And I'll go read that. But I like the Jack Reacher series. I don't know where it is. I just got the newest book. It's called Into Deep.
Okay.
So it just came out. Or wait a minute, then. Hang on. I got 2 Jack Reacher books. Actually, I think it's this one. I think the brand new one is called. Is it that one? No, I think it's In Too Deep. I have another one here called Better Off Dead. I think that's an older one that I was reading, and I'm going to reread it. So anyway, sorry.
No, that's awesome. Books are the best. All right, so wrapping up, I guess we'll go with, where can people get to find you or learn more about you?
Yeah, I think the easiest is LinkedIn, and that has all the links to my website and things like that. So LinkedIn, everything, we have a lot of stuff there. Obviously, a lot of, as you were reading, articles on our website. There's some free ebooks up there. There's actually a free marketing course, mini course I call it, up there. A lot of videos, and we are active. So every couple of weeks we post. I would encourage anybody to sign up to get on the newsletter, or certainly sign up on my LinkedIn newsletter, because then we publish there as well. And then, like I said, we're proofing it for the third time, but I have a strategy book coming out. In the next, I'll say 3 weeks or 4 weeks, but we're just fixing some kind of typo stuff that we found. I didn't think there was any, but sure enough, my partner found them.
Sure.
And it really is based on all the writings. It just took them all and kind of pieced it together, and to tell that story about strategy and how to be strategic in your approaches. There's not a whole lot of go to a social media campaign, and it's all about customer segmentation and doing research and how to do budgeting the proper way and things like that.
Well, depending on when I release this episode, we'll put the link. If the book's out by then, we'll put it in the show notes along with the other links. Yeah, just let me know,
and I'm hoping it's out. I'd like to start marketing it, but I think we're getting close.
That's awesome. All right. Well, is there anything you want to leave us with?
No, I appreciate this. I was thinking, how are we going to do 2 hours, and we've done an hour and 35 minutes. But yeah, I would say that, I'm happy to talk to people. I don't mind doing mentoring and things like that. If people have questions, I'm happy to answer them. But, I think there's a lot of nuggets in here, depending on how you edit this up. And, if you're do what we do and freelance or whatever, again, I think that not every business is good business. You really have to make sure understanding that how disruptive a bad client can be. And I have to say, one of the things I did earlier on, but back when my agency, the very first time we fired a client, it was scary as all get up, but man, did that everybody in the whole agency go, oh, thank God that person's not here anymore. So again, not every business. I think that's good, and do your homework.
Awesome. Actually, we'll leave it with that. Do your homework. Well, Angelo, thank you so much, and everyone listening, thanks for tuning in. Until next time.